Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Security Awareness Series. This is episode 297. I'm Chris Hadnaghi, CEO and founder of Social Engineer LLC, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And this podcast has been around since way back in 2009. As always, your host and sponsor for this podcast is Social Engineer LLC. So go check out the Human Behavior Conference at humanbehaviorcon.com. In November, we're going to be hosting that here in Orlando, a 2-day conference. The lineup is just amazing, and it's going to be all about influence and information security. So we're going to tie science into how we can apply that in the InfoSec industry to make our programs better and our people stronger. So go check out humanbehaviorcon.com. As always, if you're into social engineering, you should be in our Slack channel. We have, I think, close to 2,000 people in there now every day just talking about all aspects of SE. It is a family-friendly and legal place to talk. So if that doesn't sound like you, you shouldn't join. If that does sound like you, come on in. And then the link's in the show notes. And if you don't see it or if it doesn't work, sometimes Slack renews it every 30 days. Just ping me on LinkedIn and I'll get you a new one. Also want to invite everyone to go check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. Our nonprofit there is focused on helping law enforcement around the globe find and geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. And I'm really proud of it. We're almost 8 years now, and we've been over 560 cases that we've worked with on global law enforcement. Really just can't say enough good about the folks over there doing really hard work. So if you want to get information on what we're doing and you want to support us, you can do that at innocentlivesfoundation.org. And if you love the music on the podcast, it is none other than the rock and roll band Clutch. As you know, I'm a huge fan, and Neil, the lead singer, helped me start ILF 8 years ago, so we're even bigger fans now. If you like the episode today, give us a thumbs up, a like, and keep your ideas coming in for guests or themes or topics. That helps us really plan as we move forward with the shows. Now let's get to the reason we're all here, which is our guest. Really excited about this one. Roy Luongo is the Chief Information Security Officer for the United States Secret Service. He leads a team in the defense and information assurances of all the U.S. Secret Service information systems and solutions. Prior to his current role, he was a director of the Joint Mission Operations Center for Cyber Command, providing oversight of mission-critical cyber operations infrastructure. He also serves as a Chief NSA Red Team and Technical Director for the Interactive Organizations. Roy is a retired Army soldier with 20 years of service within the intelligence and cyber career fields. Roy, I also know you're also a fellow professor at U of A, which we didn't add that into your bio, but it's really great to have you here.
No, thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So the first question I'd like to ask is, how did you get to where you are today? Like, being the CISO of the Secret Service isn't exactly like you didn't wake up one morning at 19 and go, I think that's what I'm going to do with my life.
No, it's a long and illustrious way to get there, right? I tell people the first time I got into cybersecurity, or lack thereof, was hole punching floppy disks into making them double density, right?
Wow.
So I'm old. So I'm like, oh,
wow.
Yeah. Then I deep dived into the Army, kind of stayed away from it, but stayed engaged. And then through some very fortunate efforts, was allowed to get back into that path. And becoming a cyber operator at NSA definitely kept me on that path. And then at some point, with a lot of good offensive or red teaming people, we go, hey, maybe we could be good on the defensive side. And that's kind of where I am now. That's like 2 snippets on a 35-year career, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting when I ask people that question on this particular series, because we always have CISOs on, and thinking about how that path has happened. It's usually something very much like what you said. Like they start off interested in InfoSec. They kind of veer away for a little while, end up coming back, and then bam, somehow they're in this whacked out position leading because the CISO is not an easy job.
No, not today. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very lucky, with the military intelligence, which is what I did in the military. As the world transported itself into the digital age, we called it, before cyber was a term, we called it digital network intelligence, right? So you start, that's the flow from intel into cyber. And then, I was very fortunate to be involved in a lot of initiatives that grew that for the Army as well as Cybercom. I helped not stand up Cybercom, but review and articulate some of their drafting documents on what Cybercom needed to be. So that's the path. And then you end up doing this stuff because at some point you go, you're an old guy, not on keyboard much anymore. Let me help defend against bad keyboardists, right?
Uh-huh.
So
that's interesting. That must be a really proud moment for you that you helped in kind of setting that whole thing up. That's a big deal. Yeah.
I've been very blessed to be on the right working groups at the right time to be a part of really big things that I couldn't have achieved by myself. So it's a lot of people.
So let's start. I want to start with with education, but because we're both educators, we're both into educating the next generation. But let's start even before that. Let's go like K through 12. I was talking to some people that were overseas in Europe and Asian countries, and they're teaching cyber education starting like in kindergarten. So how can we help? Like, we don't see that here. I mean, sometimes I think the first time, if in school now, I taught my kids, but the first time in school, my kids were introduced to anything cyber related was in high school. And then it was like, here's how to use Word. Now they're teaching like 5-year-olds Python in Germany, right? So how do we help the communities bring this into a more K through 12 focused area?
Yeah. I think we have to. I was out at a conference in Minnesota, and I heard a stat that kind of scared me was, 70% of the graduating students have never had a course focusing on computer science. Ooh. And I'm like, we know more about the innards of a frog because we have to take bio than we do about the innards of a computer, right? And building on that into cybersecurity. So that really kind of concerned me. I think initiatives like Cyber Patriot and things like that, where we encourage after school programs, additional, extracurricular activities was a start. But I really think we need to work with educators and curriculum developers and say, unfortunately, there's only so many hours in the day. What can we take out of existing curricula to inject this in? How do we bring that in when you only have, 6-8 hours a day? But I do think it's important. There is not a child today. I have grandchildren. I'm an old guy. They have tablets. They know how to use computers. Yeah. And knowing how they know how to do it safely. I mean, sure, we've probably all been around people where you go to the computer and there's 20 open tabs and all the adware is kicking off. And we need to start younger, and we need to work with educators. It's one of the things I would love to see come out of the current administration is an emphasis in our cybersecurity executive orders to initiate some level of cyber education across the spectrum from K through 12.
So it sounds like what you're saying, because I agree that as leaders in the industry, we need to take a more aggressive role in helping young people or schools even adopt this kind of knowledge and information for the kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. After school programs and extracurricular activities are great. But it's not going to hit the broad group of people we need to worry about from a cybersecurity perspective. You obviously do a lot with Act the Human. We obviously know that humans are a huge vector, and educating them on that is very important.
Now let's move into post high school, right? So now we're in university. You and I were talking about this before. So, I go out on the internet. We both teach young people at the University of Arizona, and now we want to help them get a job. And I see a job application says entry level, must have 5 years of experience. I don't know where that started, because I remember my first jobs, entry level meant we're going to probably teach you how to do the job. Where did we get to this place where now entry level requires this unimaginable amount of talent that people coming into the industry aren't going to have?
Yeah. I think part of it, there's a kind of a multi approach. I think that got us here is one is resources, right? If you have a small cybersecurity team, the ability to take on, if you got 10 people, random number, the ability to take on 2 of those as inexperienced trainees is a tax on the organization, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to figure out how to balance that out. We need organizations to be able to take that training risk, that true entry level position, and bring them up. And I think they're trying to buy down risk by mandating experience and certifications and degrees, because that's a level of, if they have this cert or this degree or this experience, they're going to know some portion of what we have. So I think it's a buy down risk problem, and we have to be willing to accept some risk to bring that new talent in, because if we don't bring in the new talent, we're just going to be circling the same people around. And you do end up with, you actually can end up worse off, because new technology and new information comes in with that new talent. We have to do that.
Yeah, I would think though that if, let's say what you said is 100% true. So the organization is taking a huge risk by a small 10, and I need 2 people, and they're going to be entry level, and that's a huge taxable burden on the company. Then it seems like the answer is then they shouldn't be offering entry level money.
Absolutely. So so there is that point. But when you look at cybersecurity, and I don't want to give hard numbers because I haven't been out in corporate America since my time at the bank, but entry-level money in cybersecurity is still usually pretty good money, right? Like when we start talking to the hardcore cybersecurity things, the red teamers and all these people, that's not insubstantial, and I don't want to minimize help desk and stuff because that's very important. But you don't see those salary levels that people expect from their high talent pool, but they're applying them to entry level. And you're right. Either they're not entry level and you're paying for talent, or it's entry level and you have to be willing to accept the risk. But we talked about this. You're not seeing that. Yeah. You're seeing the entry level, but 5 years experience, and that just doesn't mesh up.
Yeah. So if you're a CISO listening to this and you have job infos out there, go take a look at them and see if your company is making these weird requests, and then think about that, because I think that's putting a lot of pressure on the folks looking for work. And then it makes it look like we have this massive shortage where we don't. We have so many people looking for work in this industry. It's not even funny.
Right. Yeah. And I would also recommend that you look at equivalencies, right? Like if you have a position and you say you must have this degree, caveat with some ORs or these certs or this experience, because, I definitely know of individuals that are cut out of a market that, they may have 10 years experience, but they didn't have the opportunity to get a degree at a university, but they are top in their field in what we do. Yeah. And that entire, they're chunked out because HR isn't willing to accept the potential, risk of being sued or whatever, because someone didn't get passed forward who had a degree for the person who did, right? Like, so they hard code it there, and that's a line. We probably know individuals that are amazing at what we do who don't have a degree, so they wouldn't even pass the first hurdle of HR because there's more risk to the business if someone gets hired and didn't have that mandate, right? So I think that's a problem too. So are there equivalencies?
It's something I was worried about if I had to leave my company and go somewhere. I don't have a degree, right? Because I came up in this industry and was just kind of hacking away and thought, this is what I want to do with my life,
But take a look at how many job opportunities that you are not only qualified for, but like over the top qualified for, you wouldn't pass the initial HR review because it's hard coded without or equivalent work experience, right? Yeah. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get to the CISO role, because that's really like why I wanted to talk to you. Like, this is a big deal, right? My assessment, because I'm not a CISO and I work with them every day, is you're basically given this bucket of money and you're told, secure us, and if something bad happens, your head is the one to roll. And by the way, we're not going to give you any more money, and we might give you less next year, but your job is to still do the thing. And now, with that being said, what advice would you give to any CISO listening to this episode?
Yeah. Understand your business's risk appetite, and understand that as a CISO, you're absolutely right. I used to joke that CISOs became a thing because CIOs didn't want to get fired. Understand that my actual job is security, but it's also quantifying risk, and then making sure that risk is known, and the mission owners, regardless of whether it's a company or whether it's a federal government organization like mine, they own the mission space, and they have to own that mission risk. It's the reason most CISOs aren't the authorizing official or the true risk owner. That's up the chain. My job is to quantify risk. So as a CISO, do the best job you can to quantify risk after mitigating all the risks you can. Give leadership the true knowledge set of this is your risk. And if they have the appetite to accept it, I have to sleep at night knowing that, right? I have to know there are things that I would have liked to do, but because of risk or business decisions, I can't. Yeah. But our job is to quantify risk. And I think that's one thing we as CISOs tend to miss out. We want to secure all the things, right? We want to unplug it, put it in the corner, encase it in concrete, and go, it's secure. Yeah. But it's not functional. And that's a hard sell. And then a lot of times we're telling people, no, learn to be the bad guy. That's another one. If I don't have a thick skin, you won't survive as a CISO.
So let me, and as a vendor, I'm going to twist this. I want to ask you this big question. I know people like you are getting calls from people like me 1,000 times a day, right? And everyone's got the best thing on the planet. Everyone's got the cure for all your ailments. Everyone got the fix your pain point. How do you know what to choose? Like, how do you know where to put your bucket of money?
Yeah, that is an incredibly hard thing, and I don't think I have the best answer for that, right? Like, I try to listen to as many people. Look, they have a job to do, and I couldn't do it. I'm not a salesman. So I try to listen to them. I try and be true. I tend to, if I have a gap and I go directly out, I'm a little more open to hearing what you have because I now know I'm filling a gap. And then I have to be an honest broker and kind of figure that out through market research or direct conversations on which vendors have the product I need. They're all going to come in pie in the sky, nothing against people. That's their mission, right? But we all know it. A few years ago, it was next gen firewall. It was, AI. Now it's Gen AI. Now it's quantum. How many buzzwords can hook me in? And I have to start from a premise of, I hate to say it, that's all buzzwords.
Yeah.
None of that is absolutely true until I can evaluate what you're selling me. So that's unfortunately my stance. I do get calls a lot, and I have to turn off every buzzword and then understand if it's actually going to fill a gap for me. Because if I chased everything down, I'd never get good integration, right? Because the other problem is people buy a lot of technology, but they don't integrate it well. It's not playing well together. I just have a lot of disparate toys that aren't really working well.
So you're saying if I come to you with deepfake AI, crypto, blockchain, social engineering, it's not gonna turn you on?
I will probably ask you to send me a white paper or a point paper, and I'll read it.
No, I know. I hear you. The buzzword thing is always like anything that had any type of automation before, all of a sudden became AI. And you're like, what? Wait, what are you talking about? That's the same product you had last year, but now it's supposedly artificial intelligence. I get it. Now, that's actually really a good answer, what you just said, because I think that must be not having to do that. I can't imagine the pressure and the weight because, your organization's security and risk is on your shoulders. So the two pieces of advice you just gave, I think, are really, really valuable. But let's talk about AI for a second. How do you think AI is going to adjust your job moving forward?
So two different approaches, right? Like on the defending from its intentional misuse, it's a challenge, right? There are things being put on CISOs that I as a CISO can't control when it comes to, and we'll specifically kind of been in this Gen AI, but I don't want to say Gen AI every time. But, when they come to me and say, hey, you have to make sure there's no bias in this. Well, I didn't build the model. I didn't collect the data. I didn't do any of that. Yeah. So I can't protect you from bias, right? Yeah. Even to that extent, I'm probably getting a pre-trained model for most of the stuff that's coming in because a provider came up and said, I have AI, so here's the model, right? So even understanding if that thing is designed around has hallucinations or any type of bias, or God forbid, now the new one is scheming, which scares me to death.
Yes.
Right? I have to be able to evaluate that. And unfortunately, back to shifting risk, one of those things is just give me a letter of attestation that you safely developed your AI. And then I'm supposed to sleep at night, right? Mm-hmm. So that's on the cybersecurity defending from AI misuse. And to your point, I didn't even talk about deep fakes or any of that stuff, right? That's huge. On the how am I going to use AI, I'm actually very excited about it, right? Because I can bring AI in and I can do generative AI. I can cut down on training cycles back to entry level. I don't need someone who knows KQL and knows X, Y, and Z, protocol. If I can use native language querying to parse through my AI, I can drop down some training level. And some people are like, why would you want people who don't know Nth degree? This happens all the time. I equate it to, I drive a car. I don't know how to rebuild an engine. And every time we layer on technology, we need to understand that we're not going to understand what's happening under the hood, right?
Yeah.
We both know people that can tear apart, things in assembly in their head, but I don't need everyone to do that. I need a SOC that can see an alert and ask very straight questions and use the AI to parse through massive amounts of data. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about what I haven't coined it. I don't know how to trademark anything, but what I call a dynamic baseline, using the generative AI to constantly evaluate my baseline environment and say, hey, that's abnormal, or that happens all the time and it's not abnormal. And because one of the hardest things to do to get cybersecurity sensors tuned right is understanding that baseline, and it constantly changes. So I'm hoping Gen AI can work to be more dynamic, kind of fall into that zero trust model of allowing for a more dynamic baseline and truly find those anomalies. So two sides of the AI problem, but that's my take.
Actually, I like it because a lot of times when we talk about AI, it's all the, Terminator's coming kind of thing. And it's the fear, the FUD, right? So, I like the idea of starting to talk about how can we use AI to help fix some of our problems, because what you just said, I mean, we're using in-house to start to parse massive amounts of data, and it can do things so fast. It's just, I'd have to pay humans multiple hundreds of hours to do something that this thing can do in a couple of minutes, which is just phenomenal. Yeah. How important do you think, though, it's going to be as companies adopt this, that AI, the AI you're using, the LLM, the model that you're using is in-house as opposed to somewhere in the cloud or on ChatGPT?
I think it's going to be really important from a use case perspective, right? If your use case doesn't require you to have the appropriate, storing compute to train a model or host a model or whatever, then I don't think you need to. I think there's a lot of conversation about LLMs. Everyone talks about LLMs, but we know about SLMs. How many people are talking about that small language model that does the one thing you want, but instead you're talking about having to train a large language model, or even the conversation on people not knowing what they need. Not everyone needs to build a language model. Not everyone needs to train their own language model. It's all use case developed. But the buzzword bingo is, oh my God, I need my own model and I need lots of data and I need to train it. On-prem would be better, but it depends on the use case. If I need to train a learning model, I need a lot of resources and I need a lot of data. So I need to make a decision whether I'm going to host that in cloud, temporarily use the CPU, the CPU, but the cloud resources to train it and keep my data on-prem, right? We're doing some of that. Let's host data on-prem and only use the cloud resources in a non-persistent ephemeral method to train the model, and then I own it, right? So the long answer is, I think it depends on your use case. There are definitely times when utilizing off-prem resources like cloud is important. And then there's times when doing things on-prem, it makes sense. If I have a very niche thing, say investigative work or something like that, can I use a small language model, keep all of it on-prem and not have to expose any of that to anything else? Then we get into all the RAG questions and how much RAG do I want to do? Well, then I have to allow it to go out. So again, long answer, short answer is use case dependent.
Yeah, that's a good answer, because it really does depend on what data you're putting in there, right? That how super secret squirrel you need to be. Okay, now let's switch gears again. So I'm a young person. I'm listening to this podcast. I want to be a CISO, or I'm a brand new CISO, right? I'm somebody that just got the job and I'm trying to figure out what to do. Yeah. What advice would you give yourself from now, like Roy from today, when you first got the job of being a CISO?
Oh, wow. From that starting point, that's a lot easier question. I thought you were going to ask career-wise. I'm like, quit your job, join the Army, move forward 30 years. But okay. I think one of the soft skills are important, and we don't focus on that, right? And we in technical jobs, sometimes we lack those skills. We will tell someone the hard truth. I'm sure you've read pen test reports where it's, I pwned all the things, your cybersecurity is terrible. Yeah. And it's like, that's not going to win you hearts and friends, right? So we need those soft skills. We need to be able to articulate problems. And from a CISO standpoint, it is incredibly important I can take technical concepts and turn that into layman's or business terms for those who have to make decisions. So developing that skill or those skill sets are incredibly important for a CISO. You need to be technical. And I say that importantly because I've seen a lot of CISOs, especially in corporate memory, that come up through like the business management, MBA path. And they know things about business that I have no clue on. But and that's the flip side of what I have to learn. But if they don't know tech and they can't translate that into business risk, the organization's going to fall. There's going to be problems there. Because most of my job is convincing people to do the things they don't want to, and they don't understand open ports and unpatched systems. They don't get it. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we got soft skills. Is there another thing you would?
So definitely the technical skills, understanding that. I think one of the big thing that a lot of CISOs that do come out of the technical path lack is they don't learn good leadership. Nothing against my peers. I love them all. I really do. But if you've never led a group, if you've always been that smartest guy in the room on keyboard, but you've never had to make decisions about how to run smart people, that's going to hurt. So we need to learn leadership skills at a high level and how to delegate and trust people. There's a lot of techies who will push you off keyboard because they can do it faster and smarter, and they don't learn to trust other people with that minutia that they need to give up as a CISO. If you're a CISO, you're not on keyboard running down alerts. It's not my job. And if your job is to run in the SOC and take center point in an IR, it's not going to be well organized.
Mm-hmm. Those are some really good tips. It's true. A lot of times when we come from the technical side, it can be frustrating when you're watching someone come up and they're learning it slow. And you're like, I could do this in 2 seconds, right? So that is a really nice tip, that how are you going to get them to where you are if you constantly take over and micromanage?
Yeah, and there's a cost. There's an operational cost to letting things go slower than they need to because you're not stepping in.
Yeah.
And we have to. It's back to that entry level thing. There's a cost to taking on people and having to train them. We have to be aware of that operational cost, especially at the CISO level. Like, I can't just drop my CISO job and go jump on keyboard and start doing, packet analysis.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but someday I know I'm going to want to sit back. I don't know if retire is the word, but I'm going to want to not do all the work. So if I don't train people to take my job over, then how is that ever going to happen? Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to.
I joke over the years because it comes up, the more people know about what I have to do, the less I have to do it. That's the joke. Yeah. But the truth is if I'm not training my successor, I'm doing wrong.
Yes.
No one likes to hit by a bus scenario. So we'll just say, if I take a permanent vacation tomorrow, if I've not trained my people to do the job, it's poor. If I don't learn to delegate decisions so that if I'm off today, they don't need to track me down and make a phone call for a decision, right? So I'm constantly training my replacement.
Yeah.
Now, if that person or persons never elevate, they go somewhere else, that's fine too. I've helped some other organization. But if I'm not training that, or if I'm hoarding dollars, or if I'm hoarding the decision authority, I'm not helping anybody out.
Yeah. I think that's such solid advice. I think a lot of people are afraid to train their replacement because they think that person's going to get them kicked out, right? But I hear you. And I've been saying this in my company now for the last quite a few years, is that I want everybody here to have a name for themselves, to be writing, to be speaking, to be blogging on LinkedIn, to be getting credit for the stuff they write here. That makes the company strong, right? It's not, so if the company's based on one person, well, that's pretty weak. Like you said, let's not talk about hit the bus scenario, but I just decide I don't want to do this anymore. Now everyone's got to go find another thing to do, right? But I love what you just said, because I think that's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, but such a vital part of being a leader, which is training your replacement.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add to that, understanding the goals of your employees and understanding where they want to be, not just 6 months from now, but where do you want to be in 5 years? And maybe this is a little easier in the federal government than the corporate world, so I don't want to speak too heavily on that. But if I know someone wants to be, whether it's a CISO or they want to go, they want to go be a red teamer in 5 years, right? How do I help them get there while still doing my mission? And sometimes the hard conversation is, well, you want to be there in 5 years. It's time for you to leave this job now to get the intermediary roles to get you are. And then people are like, why are you trying to get rid of me? So, well, I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'd love to keep you here. But your goals are inhibited by staying in this mission set or in this particular job. So, hey, you're an ISSO for me now. So you're doing all the compliance stuff, but you have visions to one day be a incident responder. Well, let's see if I can move you towards the SOC. Maybe I can get you some training. So a year from now, you're not the entry level guy no one wants to take on, right? So I think it's really important to not hold your people back, but you don't know you're holding them back if you don't understand their long-term goals.
That's a really, really nice piece of advice. Honestly, I'm going to apply that here. That really is sometimes you got goals for your people because you see a talent in them, but that may not be what they want for their future. Right. And how much more empowering is it if you actually understand where they want to be? And then you're like, okay, let's get you there. Right. That's powerful advice. Thank you, Roy. That's a really good one. I have a question I always ask, a couple of questions I always ask people when they come on the show. So for me, I know I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for a few key mentors in my life. I could probably name 3 or 4 people that literally, if it wasn't for them, I'm not who I am today. Who would you say are your key mentors?
So in the industry, I consider some of these people friends as well. Ed Scotus, I think, is a huge industry mentor for me. I've got federal government mentors that may or may not mean a lot to people. This gentleman, General Vile, was a huge opportunity in my last position. A gentleman named Sean Tursky, he was a senior executive at the National Security Agency, and I still reach out to him when I have a conversation on leadership and maybe my next career path. So I think those people are huge. There's so many more I could get into. There's an old Army warrant officer, unfortunately he passed away. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. There's a TED Talk called Lollipop Moments. I advocate that to everybody to watch. And to summarize it down, it's this gentleman gave lollipops out at college registration for new students. Mm. And he met a young lady in her senior year and said, that lollipop kept me in line. And it made me go back on myself and find individuals who, unbeknownst to them, did a single act or a couple of acts that kept me on a path that they never knew about. So I encourage people to look into those, right? And one of the biggest ones, I was a warrant officer in the Army back when I was in AIT, so military training way up front. And I was struggling with Morse code of all things. Don't ask, that's a different thing. And he basically called me in and he said, Roy, called me Private Luongo, you're done. You're done. You're going to go be infantry. And I'll go back to class. And long story short, I passed code that afternoon. He said, yeah, that's what I do to everybody. And I moved on with my life. So when I watched that TED Talk about 4 years ago, it made me hunt him down and reach out because that one act kept me on a military career that led me to where I am today.
Wow.
So when you talk about mentors, sometimes mentors are these lollipop moments of people who never know they mentored you. Never.
I agree. I
wanted to point that one out. Sorry.
No, that's an awesome one. Yeah, I have a few stories just like that where somebody said one thing to me in a conversation that is part of my mantra today. It's like you can't forget those things or those people because they're super important. Right. Yeah. Now, my next question is about books, but I'm going to put your TED Talk that you mentioned there because I think that's an amazing thing people should go watch. But I've been asking this question since 2009. And it doesn't have to be anything about what we spoke about today. It could be just a favorite book or two that you have. Is there a book that you've read that you're like, everyone should read this book?
So I'll keep it a little focused because I'm a big fantasy guy and those mean nothing to our field, right? But there's kind of two. Most of the stuff on Rick Howard's canon is pretty solid. One I encourage people to read is Kingpin because it reads like a spy novel. But it's about cyber hackers doing cyber things and some of the dark web underworld, right? So I think that's a good one for people to read there. And then I'll throw one leadership book in. It's called Turn the Ship Around. It's by Dave Marquette, and he was a submariner commander who came on to a sub-performing sub. Yeah, that made sense. And really changed the entire focus of the ship. Did a lot of leadership delegation and so forth. And what resonates to me with that is we lead technically smart people. He came onto a ship of really smart people, nuclear engineers, all this stuff. And he said, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I need to delegate. I need to empower you to make decisions so you don't have to find and run up to me every time we need to make a hard decision. That book really resonates. And I tried to live that way. That's one of my core leadership things is to delegate authority. I could never delegate responsibility. I always answer for my people, but delegating them to make decisions is incredible. And that book really resonates on that. So Turn the Ship Around.
I love that. Thank you. I'll put all of these into the show notes, and we have this running list.
I know you asked for one. I gave you at least two or three.
Everyone does that. It's fine. So we've had this list on the .org since 2009, and then my people started doing this amazing thing where they put a link to the book on Amazon, but also a link to the podcast where the book was recommended. So we have a lot of very avid readers that are listeners of this podcast. So they will go to the book list and just kind of search, okay, leadership, bam, and now they'll find some recommendations. So that's really good. I can't thank you enough, Roy, for coming on the show. This was a really great conversation.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for inviting me. I will love talking about my opinions on this topic. It's really great. And again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and great advice too. So I think this is going to be one that people are going to love for a long period of time. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, sir. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for joining Roy and I this month. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And next month, we're going to be joined by Julie Chapman, another CISO that we'll be talking to and learning from her. Until then, everyone stay safe. See you next month.